In the brutal arithmetic of war, a single life is a statistic. 100 lives are a victory, a defeat, a footnote in a dispatch. But what is the value of one man, armed with nothing but bandages and courage, standing between 100 lives and oblivion? Before start this video, please subscribe to our channel. This is not a story of generals or grand strategy. This is a story of sheer, unyielding humanity in the heart of hell. It is the story of a soldier whose weapon was compassion, whose battlefield was a field of shattered men, and whose defiance against the crushing machinery of war would become the stuff of legend. This is how one medic rescued 100 wounded soldiers. The date was January 30th, 1945. The location, a snow-churned, blood-soaked scrap of land near the town of Holtzwihr in the frozen grip of the Alsace region of France. Here, the American 3rd Infantry Division, the famed Rock of the Marne, was locked in a vicious struggle against a fanatical German rearguard, fighting for every frozen inch in what would become known as the Colmar Pocket. The battle was a meat grinder, and into its gears was thrown a young medic from Company B, 1st Battalion, 30th Infantry Regiment. His name was Private First Class Richard "Doc" Anderson. To understand the magnitude of what would happen on that January day, we must first understand the stage. The Colmar Pocket was Hitler's last foothold on the western bank of the Rhine. A bulge of German resistance, it was defended by battle-hardened, desperate units ordered to fight to the last man. The Allied High Command, needing to clear the Alsace before the final push into Germany, had tasked the French First Army and supporting American divisions with its reduction. For the men of the 3rd Infantry Division, the fighting had been a special kind of nightmare. The winter of 1944-45 was one of the coldest on record. Temperatures plummeted well below freezing. The ground was iron hard, making digging foxholes a brutal exercise. Snow squalls would reduce visibility to zero, only to clear and reveal the sinister outlines of German positions in distant woodlines and villages. Private First Class Richard "Doc" Anderson was, by all accounts, a quiet man from the Midwest. He wasn't a born killer, he was a born caregiver. At 22 years old, he had trained not in marksmanship, but in triage, not in assault, but in the delicate, gruesome art of battlefield medicine. His uniform bore the Red Cross armband, a symbol he knew offered no guarantee in the fury of close combat. His arsenal consisted of morphine syrettes, sulfa powder, tourniquets, and a few precious pints of plasma. Company B's objective that day was a fortified line of farmhouses and trenches on the outskirts of the village of Holtzwihr. Intelligence suggested a company-strength enemy force, well entrenched and supported by machine guns and mortars. The American plan was a frontal assault across open, snowy fields, a necessary but terrifying tactic. Anderson's aid station was established in the relative cover of a shallow drainage ditch about 400 yards behind the line of departure. It was nothing more than a few medical kits laid out on a poncho. As the men of Company B checked their M1 Garans and fixed bayonets, a silent dread settled over them. They knew the price of open ground. Anderson checked and rechecked his supplies. He knew his job would begin only when the plan failed. And on that frozen field, under a leaden gray sky, the plan was about to fail catastrophically. At 0630 hours, under a creeping artillery barrage meant to soften the German defenses, the order was given. 2 platoons from Company B, roughly 80 men, rose from their jump-off points and began advancing across the open field. For the first 100 yards, an eerie silence prevailed, broken only by the crunch of boots on crusted snow and the distant thunder of their own supporting guns. Then, at 6:45, the world erupted. Hidden Machine Gewehr 42 positions, untouched by the barrage, opened fire with interlocking fields of fire. The rate of fire was staggering, over 1,200 rounds per minute. The air was filled with the lethal buzzing sound of 7.92 millimeter rounds. Simultaneously, German Granatwerfer 81 millimeter mortar rounds began walking their deadly pattern across the field, throwing up geysers of dirt, snow, and shrapnel. The American advance halted, then shattered. Men dove for cover behind pathetic folds in the ground. Within minutes, the field was littered with wounded and dying soldiers. Their cries for medic were torn away by the wind and gunfire. Back at the drainage ditch, Anderson and the company's other medic, a man named PFC Jenkins, heard the disaster unfolding. They saw the silhouettes of men falling, not advancing. By 07:15, the attack had completely stalled. The company commander, Captain Harold Reynolds, was dead, his radio operator beside him. The surviving platoon leaders were pinned down, unable to coordinate a withdrawal or a new assault. A handful of wounded men managed to crawl or stumble back to the American lines, leaving a grim trail of blood in the snow. They brought with them a horrific picture. Dozens of men, some critically wounded, were scattered across the killing zone. The German fire was so intense that any movement drew immediate concentrated fire. At 0800 hours, a desperate attempt was made to evacuate a group of wounded using an M29 Weasel cargo carrier. The light-tracked vehicle, barely armored, was spotted halfway across the field. A Panzerfaust round from a German infantryman struck it squarely. The Weasel and the 3 men inside it were obliterated. The message was horrifyingly clear. No vehicle, no group could survive in that open ground. PFC Jenkins, attempting to reach a cluster of wounded just 50 yards from the American line, was cut down by a burst of machine gun fire. He was killed instantly. Now, Richard Anderson was alone. He was the only medic left for the entire shattered company. He looked out at the field, a white canvas now painted with dark, motionless shapes and the flashes of German muzzles. He estimated at least 30, maybe 40 men were out there, bleeding out, freezing to death, their lives measured in minutes. The battalion aid station was over a mile to the rear. There would be no reinforcements, no miraculous evacuation. The command post, reeling from the loss of officers, could offer no solutions. The 100 men of Company B were on the verge of being wiped off the map, not through annihilation, but through slow, agonizing attrition. By 900 hours, a grim paralysis had set in. The remaining able-bodied soldiers of Company B, perhaps 20 in number, were trapped in shallow holes, unable to move, unable to fire effectively, forced to listen to the agonized pleas of their comrades. The German fire had slackened from a continuous roar to a watchful, predatory rhythm. They were conserving ammunition, waiting for any rescue attempt, confident in their kill zone. For Richard Anderson, crouched in his ditch, this was the crucible. The rulebook was gone. Standard procedure, wait for a lull, use covering fire, evacuate in teams, was meaningless. Every protocol had been shredded by MG-42 fire. He was looking at an impossible equation. One man against a field swept by deadly fire to save dozens. The cold was a physical enemy, seeping through his wool uniform, threatening frostbite. But a colder fear gripped him, the fear of failing the men he relied on. He made his first decision. He would not wait. He would go alone. Stripping his gear to the absolute essentials, he filled his pockets with morphine, bandages, and tourniquets. He slung as many canteens of water as he could carry. He left his helmet behind, believing the Red Cross brassard on his arm and the sheer audacity of his mission would have to be his protection. This was an act of supreme courage or utter desperation. At 09:15 hours, he moved. His first rescue was the closest. A young private, shot through the thigh, had managed to crawl about 70 yards. Anderson low-crawled inch by agonizing inch through the frozen mud and snow. The German line, seeing a single crawling figure, held their fire. Perhaps they thought he was another wounded man. Perhaps they were confused. He reached the private, administered morphine, packed the wound with sulfa powder, and applied a tourniquet. Then the real test began. He had to get him back. There was no way to drag the man without exposing them both. Anderson made a sling with his own musette bag and the private's rifle strap. He half-carried, half-dragged the dead weight, his muscles screaming, his breath coming in ragged, fogged gasps. The 70-yard return journey felt like a mile. Every second he expected the searing impact of a bullet. He made it to the ditch. He deposited the wounded soldier with the stunned survivors, turned around, and went back out. And he did it again. For the next hour, Anderson performed a solitary, lethal ballet. He would identify a wounded man, crawl to him, administer aid, and then devise a way to bring him in. He used firemen's carries on men with chest wounds. He fashioned litters from overcoats and rifles for men with broken legs. Sometimes he would drag a man a few yards, take cover behind a low hummock or a shell crater to rest, then drag again. The German observers watched. Incredibly, they did not fire. Later, captured German soldiers would admit they were ordered to hold fire on the lone medic. Some claimed it was a moment of chivalry. Others, more cynically, understood that a living, screaming wounded man tied up more enemy resources than a dead one. For Anderson, the reason didn't matter.